Hello and welcome to Beyond the Headlines. I'm Justin Schnitt. This show is all about delving past the surface story to give you in-depth analysis of the major topics making headlines around the state, locally, or even nationally, or even sometimes globally. And today's issue is a very serious one. In light of the recent string of suicides by gay teenagers, today's topic has to do with bullying and harassment and hopefully moving towards tolerance and acceptance. And here to talk about those topics and a lot more is Vermont Outright Executive Director Melissa Murray. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
How did you get involved with Outright Vermont and in general social justice issues?
It's a big question. I've always been interested in social justice. I had a teacher in high school that essentially introduced me to social justice issues, and so I've really made a point in my career towards having jobs that allow me to work in the field of social justice. So the Outright job is a perfect fit for me. I had done some social justice work in the queer community in Ohio, where I'm from, so coming to Outright was a natural fit.
And what is Outright Vermont for those watching the program and are like, what is that organization?
Well, the mission of Outright Vermont is to build safe, healthy, and supportive environments for gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning youth ages 13 to 22. And we accomplish that in a variety of ways. And Outright's been around since 1989. So one of our signature programs is Friday Night Group, and it's a social and support group that meets for queer youth facilitated by a queer adult. Who acts as the moderator of the discussion. That has happened every Friday since 1989 without fail. So no matter if it's a Friday that it's a holiday or if there's a blizzard, there's always Friday Night Group in Burlington. So that's sort of the cornerstone of our programming.
And you mentioned Burlington. Is it just for people in Burlington?
No, we have youth all across the state, and one thing we do know is that there are queer youth in every community in Vermont, in every county, and we know that through the Youth Risk Behavior Survey data. So that's not our numbers, that's numbers that somebody outside of our organization came up with. So we travel across the state. We actually have programming starting on November 19th in Rutland. So starting in Rutland on November 19th, every other week we'll offer our Friday night support group and something social afterwards. And then we're working on something in Washington County, and we also do quarterly programming in Brattleboro, and St. Johnsbury is actually next on our list. We've had some contacts here and have tried to do some things here, but funding. Once we get funding, St. Johnsbury is next. Our hope is to bring a very successful peer-based support model out into the community instead of expecting youth to travel all the way to Burlington to us. We have tried in the past to offer transportation assistance, but because of the nature of Vermont, it's just too complicated and too costly and too time-consuming. So what we ultimately decided is that we could use those resources to bring our programming out into the broader community because we are a statewide organization.
And you just mentioned it was a statewide organization. Is there any connection to a national organization?
Nope. We are a member of the Gay Straight Alliance Network. We have worked with various national organizations on various topics, but we are our own standalone organization.
And what is do you have some sort of partnership with educational institutions like either the high schools or middle schools or even colleges or universities in the state? You
know, we have built up relationships over the years. We have, last school year, we presented to over 4,000 participants our anti-bullying and anti-harassment training. And this year, let's see, it's late October, we've already presented to over 600 youth. So we're very busy. So our education person, who's amazing, contacts schools at the beginning of the year, contacts all the middle schools and high schools in Vermont, and gets invited to come present to those students. And sometimes the person inviting us is the principal or a teacher. Sometimes it's the librarian or the school nurse or a cafeteria worker who witnesses some sort of harassment and thinks that we need to be there. And so we get invited out to schools based on our reputation for offering a really well put together program, and based on the letter that we send out that says, these are the statistics about your school. We know that in your school, for example, there are 5% of students identify as lesbian, gay, and bisexual. What can we do to help those students have a safer experience at school?
And what are some things that you can do in the schools? Because you've seen the recent headlines.
Right.
I mean, there's at least 7 gay teens who have committed suicide, and those are just the ones that have been reported.
Right. And the thing about that, it's absolutely tragic and horrifying. It's not a new phenomenon. For whatever reason, the media has picked up on it right now. It's not a new crisis. Queer youth have been committing suicide for many reasons, for many decades. So while it is horrifying that there have been 7 in the national news, there are queer youth killing themselves all the time. And in Vermont, for instance, we know that queer youth are 8 times more likely than their heterosexual peers to consider or attempt suicide, which is a ridiculously high number.
Why do you think that is?
I think social isolation has a big part to play in it. Because Vermont is rural, because it's hard to get to places in Vermont, youth aren't finding the other youth that they can connect to. And when you can't find someone to connect to, you feel alone, and then you start to feel like maybe you're not like everyone else. So one of the things we do with our Friday night group and really with our educational programming is we come in and we say, you're not alone. We know that there are other queer youth here. What can we do to help? And another cornerstone of our programming is starting and supporting Gay Straight Alliance clubs in schools. I think we currently have 30 Gay Straight Alliance clubs in schools across Vermont. And essentially what that is a club that meets as often as the students want, and they discuss a wide variety of topics. Some of the Gay Straight Alliance clubs are called the Human Rights Club because the school can't or has a hard time letting them have something called the Gay Straight Alliance Club, or anything we can do to be there to support students and to help them find each other and find the supportive youth that are in their own communities, we will do. So,
and anytime talking about this topic, the words tolerance and acceptance always arise. There's been a recent story that was reported on CNN recently about an Arkansas school board member basically going to be resigning over anti-gay comments on his Facebook. What do you think are the major causes for people to be not as tolerant as others may like them to be? What do you think causes people to, either have hatred or be bullying to those who may be different than them? Right. What do you see are the major causes in your experiences?
Well, I don't profess to know, but I know that a lot of folks rely on religion, and because they feel that homosexuality is against their religious beliefs, they use that as justification to essentially torment queer youth. And even the folks that don't actively torment queer youth are raising children in households where they use that kind of language, where they use that kind of hate speak, where they use the slurs, where they're not accepting and open, and then those youth then feel like they have the right to torment these youth because they've been raised to believe that these queer youth are somehow less. And if somebody is less, then that can often be used as, justification for bullying. So I think, religion, I think the world is moving in a direction and not everybody's excited about that. I think we are in a time where people are more tolerant and more open and more accepting of more different kinds of people than ever before. And that's terrifying to some people who really want to maintain the status quo, who feel like, the way that they live their life is the model for the way the rest of the country should live their life. And that's just not the case. It's not reality, and it doesn't serve our queer youth.
Just playing devil's advocate for a second, I've seen either in the national conversation or locally people who think it's okay to pick on or whatever, say that they're not necessarily bad people. They may not be as educated or exposed to it. Do you see those things playing in terms of people's lack of tolerance? It's more about them just not being exposed or educated about it?
Right. It's not that they're not educated, they just don't have all the information because they may rely on one source for their information. And what we know, especially in our country, is that you can't rely on one source for all your information. You need to look for multiple sources to get a clearer sense of what the reality is. And that's one of the things about going into schools that's so helpful, is that we may not change anybody's minds, and we're not trying to change anybody's belief system. We're trying to say there are people that are different, and difference is not justification for cruelty and torment.
Where do you see the world or our society in 5 to 10 years? Are you hopeful that it's going in the direction of more tolerance and at some point acceptance, because tolerance is kind of the lowest level,
right,
and at some point, acceptance? Or do you see that these are continual problems because of that in-group, out-group theory of sociology of, oh, you're different, you're not as good as me, you look different, you act different, let me put you in this category. It's like labeling at a grocery store.
Right, of course.
Do you see it changing significantly, or is it very gradual like it has been in the past?
I hope it's changing significantly. I think the queer adult community, things are getting better and better for queer adults. We have marriage equality in several states, including Vermont. there are more protections than ever before for queer adults. But those protections don't always trickle down to youth.
Okay.
So that's one part of that. The other part is that I think that kids are going, that kids are going to be cruel to other kids because they're different no matter what. I don't know that we can change that. What we can do is put into place stricter protections for those youth and encourage more education so that youth know that that's just not, it's not okay to target somebody for that reason. I think, the overall philosophy about bullying in schools for me is that dignity is a basic human right. And that's a basic human right for everyone, whether you've bullied someone, whether you're being bullied, it's a basic human right. And we need to teach our youth that. And they may not believe that, for instance, homosexuality is okay, but that doesn't mean that they can treat youth with anything less than full dignity. And so for me as a parent, that's what I'm trying to teach my kids. And that's what I hope Outright is teaching other kids in the community, that dignity is not negotiable. It is a basic human right, and everybody deserves to be treated with dignity.
If someone watching this program might be a young person who's struggling with his or her sexuality and is dealing with maybe harassment in their school or in their community, what kind of advice as an executive director of this sort of organization, what would you tell that person? Because they may be contemplating suicide, they may be going through such an emotional state that they don't know how to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and just brush it off like some say, or it's just words, you need to get over it. They may be in a very tight spot and they may be on the verge of losing it.
Right.
What would you tell somebody like that?
I would tell them to find an adult. I would tell them to find a caring and supportive adult in their life. And if they can't find one in their immediate circle, go to your guidance counselor. We have a hotline. We have a phone number. We're happy to come do trainings whenever we can. There's a national hotline, Trevor Project hotline, for queer youth contemplating suicide. But I would find an adult. That's the very first thing that I would do. And if you can't find that adult, call us and we'll help you find it. Find that person, because finding one person who you can talk to is, maybe the best thing you can do. The other thing is that harassment, if you're being harassed based on your sexual orientation or gender identity, that's illegal in Vermont. You need to go to the designated person in your school. Each school is required by law to have 2 folks that are designated investigators of harassment claims. Go to those people and say, this is what I'm experiencing. If you don't get anywhere with those folks, call the Vermont Human Rights Commission and make a complaint, and they will investigate, because it's illegal. If you are experiencing this level of harassment based on one of the protected classes, it's illegal. So there is, legal maneuvering you can do to make it stop. That finding a caring adult, calling a hotline, protesting the illegal harassment, these are all great. They don't always work. And I recognize that. And so finding other youth, and that's really what we're here to do. We're here to find other youth, maybe not queer youth, maybe allies who want to start Gay Straight Alliance clubs, so that youth who's feeling those feelings can recognize that there is a school group that supports them and wants to help them through whatever they're going through. So, and still that might not be enough, but there are lots of different things you can do. And, there are 2 national initiatives, the It Gets Better Project and the Make It Better Project. And if a youth is just feeling completely isolated, I would encourage that youth to watch videos on YouTube from these projects, because they're amazing. And there's, the It Gets Better Project is queer adults telling youth that it gets better and maybe sharing some of their own experience. The Make It Better Project is actually queer youth talking about what they're doing right now to make it better now, and not wait till they're adults to make it get better. So if, a youth is totally isolated, can't reach out, watch those videos. And see what you can see there, because there's some really powerful stuff going on.
I'm sure the internet has created a situation where it's easier to connect with others.
Right, which is good and bad.
Oh, can you talk about cyberbullying?
Well, I can talk about cyberbullying because cyberbullying, there is not a cyberbullying law in Vermont. There's a harassment law. So essentially people often confuse bullying and harassment. They are, in many states, interchangeable, but in Vermont, harassment is actually if you're being bullied based on membership in a protected class. So there is no cyberbullying law, which, as we know, as technology becomes more important and a bigger part of every youth's daily life, we need a cyberbullying law. We need to put some protections into place. The thing, one thing I wanted to mention is FormSpring. So if you're talking about technology, FormSpring, I'm not sure exactly what it is. I know that youth can anonymously post to FormSpring questions and comments, and other youth can read them. And we've had some issues with that already, and FormSpring is relatively new. The thing I want to say most of all is that you may think it's anonymous, but if a youth files a harassment claim against somebody who is tormenting them on FormSpring, the police can get the IEP address and can find out who it is. So I just want to caution youth that, one, FormSpring, it's not as anonymous as you think, and two, anything you put on the internet is there forever. Even if you take it down, people can still find it. And it's permanent. And so something you might say on Facebook in the heat of the moment when you're having an argument with somebody, it doesn't go away. And legal repercussions can happen, and college admissions folks read what's on Facebook and they look at that. People who want to give you a job read what's on Facebook, and they can base their decisions on stuff that you say. If you're talking about bullying somebody, if you're talking about alcohol and drug use, folks can see that. So I think the cyberbullying thing, it's bigger than just cyberbullying. Cyberbullying is getting worse and worse, obviously, but it's also how youth are being represented to the world. I think there just needs to be more overall education for youth about sort of internet safety and what the repercussions are for things that you say on the internet.
Does Vermont outright work with the Vermont legislature or politicians on policy making?
Outright Vermont does work on a policy level, and we advocate for youth on a policy level. What we often do is we have youth that become interested in a specific topic, and we support those youth going forward and doing whatever they want to do, whether it's presenting to politicians, as we had a youth do during the marriage equality bill, or talking to politicians about gender-neutral bathrooms in public schools. So we do everything we can. We don't want to go and represent the youth. We want to support the youth that we work with so they can represent themselves. So we do whatever we can to make that happen. And the other thing we do is we have Visibility Day in Montpelier every year, where we bring queer youth to, it's LGBTQ Visibility Day, and so queer youth are represented in that forum too. So.
A debate that I see often between multiple parties is hate speech versus free speech.
Right.
As a dialogue that tends to take place, and in the idea of special treatment or special rights
right.
Allocated to one group over another group. What is your take on that in terms of, are you allowed under the First Amendment to utilize derogatory terms and towards another individual based on a particular group or orientation or whatever it may be because of the Constitution, or do you think it's a separate issue?
It's very tricky. You know, my gut reaction is you are allowed to say those things. Should you say them? Of course not. And again, in Vermont, if I can fall back on the Vermont harassment law, if you say those things and you create a hostile environment for somebody based on a protected class, that's illegal. So you may feel like you have the right to say that, but if what you say is harassing somebody else or is impeding somebody else's right to their free speech or their right to happiness or their right to basic dignity, then there's an issue. But I always go back to the thing, human dignity. Dignity is a basic human right. And if the language that you're using and you feel comfortable using is impeding my human dignity, then there's a problem. And that's what the harassment law in Vermont, and you know, hopefully soon the anti-cyberbullying laws will help us to prevent. So I know that a lot of folks say, you can't take away my rights to say these things. I'm not trying to take away anyone's right. I'm trying to protect the youth that is most vulnerable.
In terms of special rights, say for instance, someone physically assaulted someone who was gay. Should it be law that it should be based on that physical interaction, not necessarily based on hate? Because that sometimes plays in the argument of, well, if it's the issue itself right. Is the problem, they may have not known that person was, it could have
right.
been, but there's a lot of leeway there.
Right.
How do you analyze that maybe from a third-party perspective?
Well, I guess it's hard to analyze it without all the details. One thing I would say immediately is that queer folks aren't looking for special rights, they're looking for equal rights. So when you say special rights, we just want to be treated equally. In a situation like that, it's a hate crime if the act is because you're a member of a protected class. For me personally, I don't know that it's a hate crime if somebody's just randomly targeted on the street. That's an assault. It's not a hate crime. Usually you can tell it's a hate crime by the speech that's involved in the process. But yeah, that's a very gray area. It's very tricky to figure out, you know, and I'm not a lawyer, so I can't really decide. But I would say it's not special rights we're looking for, it's equal rights.
And I asked the question about advice for someone struggling. What about advice for a bully? What about advice that you would give to that person who is maybe, I don't know about looking for knowledge or awareness, I would use that word, in terms of gay issues. But what kind of advice would you give a bully that obviously they may be feeling some fears or insecurities of themselves and they're pushing that off on somebody else? What kind of resources that you may reach out, I don't know, without Outright Vermont, that can help those students or those young people?
Right. My first inclination is to tell the bully to stop. We don't typically work with bullies. I know that there are organizations across the state that do work with bullies, so I don't really know how to answer that question.
Okay.
The folks in the schools that are the reporters about harassment claims probably have more skills and information in terms of, you know, intervening in bullying behavior with bullies. The thing that I would say, based on the national media attention about anti-gay bullying, is that the bullying student is just another youth. And we can't really vilify all youth that bully. There, like you said, are a lot of issues going on. So what can we do to help support that youth maybe is something that we need to think about. But right now we're so busy thinking and working with the youth that are being bullied that we just don't have the capacity to work with the bullying youth. But I don't want those youth to be vilified. I want them to have education and you know, reach some level of understanding. But I think ultimately it starts in the home. If your youth is bullying other youth for some reason, it's because they were taught in the home that maybe queer people aren't as good or as valuable or as respected as heterosexual people. So, but yeah, it's tricky.
What kind of preventive initiatives do you think are necessary in terms of avoiding bullying and harassment based on either sexual orientation or anything, or just bullying in general, in trying to changing a mentality from more of a hatred or fear to a level of tolerance or acceptance?
Right. I think we need to start early with our kids and not, I'm not saying we need to go in and do queer presentations for kindergartners, but we need to create a culture where difference is not only respected and accepted and tolerated, but the way it is. We live in an ever-changing world where everyone is different on some level, and we need to accept and respect that and teach our kids, even, you know, young kids, that difference is okay and that nobody is better or less than somebody else because their skin color is different or their sexual orientation is different or their religion is different. So yeah, we need to start earlier. So,
wrapping up our time together, what sort of phone numbers or URL addresses for websites that anybody can go to to not only learn more information of Outright Vermont, but also, like you mentioned, the Trevor Project is one example. Can you give some of those resources out? Well,
Outright's website is outrightvt.org. For me, I don't actually know the web addresses for the Trevor Project, the Make It Better Project, and the It Gets Better Project. Whenever I want to go to those websites, I Google it, and it comes right up. So, and I think our Outright's hotline, which is staffed Monday through Friday from 10 to 6, is 1-800-GLB-CHAT, C-H-A-T. So I would encourage youth to call us. If there are ways that we can especially help them, we will try everything we can to make that happen.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
And thank you for watching Beyond the Headlines. I'm Justin Schnedt. After the program, we're going to have graphics on the screen with all of the contact information you need to not only learn more information about Vermont Outright, but also some of the initiatives that were mentioned in the program. And as a side comment, I would just like to say, those of you who are watching the program who might be struggling out there or might be facing bullying and harassment, it does get better, and there are resources out there for you. And that each and every one of us was put on this earth for a reason, and we are special. That's what makes our society great, is our differences, not our similarities. Imagine if our whole world was made up of gray blobs of matter, and then the only difference is who we are on the inside. Imagine that scenario playing out. Would you like everybody to be exactly like you? Wouldn't that be boring? Just remember that your words have ramifications. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And someone is on the receiving end of it. Whether it may be a joke. You might say that thing is gay or that thing or whatever. That has a ramification. And you don't know what somebody is going through. Live and let live. Each person has to live their life. You are the driver in the car of life on the highway of self-discovery, meaning the only person that can take responsibility for your life is you. And you have to live with your decisions. You have to look yourself in the mirror and move on. You have to look yourself in the mirror and say, is this the life I want to be living? Is this how I want to be treating other people? So think about those topics as you go about your daily hustle and bustle. I know it's hard sometimes because we tend to get really busy, but this is about our future. This is about young people. This is about people in general and being able to really be happy. That's at our core. We want to just live our lives. So think about those topics. I'm Justin Schnett. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you right back here at Beyond the Headlines, only on KATV.